Israel is on the boil again, and this time it is its own people. Look at these images. They're from Tel Aviv. Thousands of people have been protesting here for days, armed with drums, slogans, and flags. It's the same story in city after city. Jerusalem, Ramat HaSharon, Bani Barak, Haifa, you name it, almost every major Israeli city is in the grip of demonstrations. The question is why? And the answer is one man, Benjamin Netanyahu. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. My name is Mohammed Saleh, and in the next few minutes, we'll tell you why Israel is witnessing some of the biggest protests in its history. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, returned to Israel's top job with the country's most right-wing and religiously conservative coalition in December 2022. A coalition that wants to curb the powers of the judiciary. There is simply no other way to put it. Just look at the proposal the Netanyahu government has made. These are a series of changes to the judicial system that will upset the balance of power in the state of Israel. Let me list out the changes for you. Firstly, diminish the ability of the courts to conduct judicial reviews of basic laws. Secondly, to allow lawmakers to pass laws struck down by the Israeli high courts. Thirdly, empower lawmakers to override decisions of the Israeli Supreme Court. Fourthly, to let the lawmakers play a greater role in the appointment of Supreme Court judges, and also to grant government control over judicial appointments like that of the High Court judges. The question is this: what's the idea behind these changes? What does the Netanyahu government want to achieve by bringing about these changes and breaking the judiciary's back? Israel's Justice Minister has offered an explanation. He says it's because the public's faith in judiciary has plummeted to an all-time historic low. Therefore, he wants the politicians to play a greater role in the daily functioning of the judiciary. So that is the aim of these judicial changes. Allow me to quote a statement by Israel's law minister. He said, and I quote him here, "We go to the polls and vote, choose, but time after time, people who we didn't elect decide for us. That's not democracy." We wonder what democracy is then. My point is simple. Aren't democracies supposed to function through a system of checks and balances? Isn't the separation of powers between the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive the very basis of democracy? Isn't concentrating all powers in the hands of the ruling coalition an authoritarian decision? These are not my questions alone. These are the questions that the people of Israel are asking. You must listen to their voices.
I came over to protest and demonstrate against the trial of the Israeli government to cause a dictatorship on Israel.
I'm here with so many other Israelis to demonstrate against the so-called reform, which is threatening the Israeli democracy.
I'm here to protest against the reform in the law and to protest against our Prime Minister, that we call him Crime Minister.
We are here to protect our democracy, our country, because we feel that our country is under a brutal attack of the government.
These are not isolated voices. The number of people protesting is simply unprecedented, to say the least. In Tel Aviv alone, according to estimates by local NGOs, a total of 200,000 people were out on the streets this week. If we speak of the entire nation, then as many as about 500,000 people hit the streets across Israel. And if we speak of the timeline of these protests, then these protests have been underway for over 10 weeks. That's 2.5 months. The question is, what comes next? Where are things headed? Well, these demonstrations have all the bearings of a civil war. Again, it is not me who's saying this. Israel's president is. Listen to this.
מי שחושב שמלחמת אחים של ממש, של חיי אדם, היא גבול שלא נגיע אליו, אין לו מושג. דווקא עכשיו, בשנת ה-75 למדינת ישראל.
You heard that. The abyss of a civil war is at arm's reach. and the president is not alone in his assessment. This man is Yoel Diskin, the former head of Israel's security agency. He's issued a similar warning. He says there'll be a civil war if the government continues to push for judicial reforms as they exist. Benny Gantz, the country's former Minister of Defense, has said the same thing. He said that if Netanyahu continues on the path that he's following, he'll be responsible for a civil war in the Israeli society. And let's not even talk about Israel's arch foes, enemies like the Hezbollah. Hezbollah has said that for the first time since Israel's formation, the country has come close to a civil war, a war which Hezbollah says will lead to Israel's demise. And it doesn't end there. Even the Israeli media is speaking against the government. The Jerusalem Post carried this story recently, asking Netanyahu to cease attacks on the media and to listen to the voice of the Israeli people. The Times of Israel is also carrying critical op-eds. Take this one, for instance. It says if the current government goes ahead with its plan, then Israel could very well become the next Afghanistan. And then we have Haaretz, another famous Israeli newspaper. It is criticizing the government's plans, raising questions on the fate of Israel's democracy. So you have the people, the president, former intel chiefs, former defense leaders, and an array of Israeli media houses. They're all questioning Netanyahu's plan. Will this at least lead to a rethink? Will Netanyahu give in? Not yet, because Netanyahu remains defiant. He's refused to compromise and he continues to defend the legal reforms. He says that his plan will only bring about Israel's democracy in line with what is acceptable in Western democracies, like the United States, where the executive also makes some judicial appointments. But this comparison is a bit flawed. You see, in the United States of America, if a majority of the House of Representatives aim to pass a legislation, the bill will still have to pass the Senate, the presidential veto, and the federal courts. Each of these institutions answer to different constraints and constituencies. They all operate under a defined Bill of Rights that is extremely hard to change. Many legal matters are also within the purview of the states and not the federal government. Simply put, legal reforms require the consent of many different institutions and constituencies. But in the case of Israel, if a simple majority of the parliament supports any bill or reform, it would face just one obstacle, and that is the Israeli Supreme Court. Netanyahu's new reform bill seeks to abolish this procedure as well. This could compromise elections, compromise the freedom of courts, and not to mention compromise the rights of minorities in Israel. In short, it could lead to abuse of power. This is not how democracies function. They require a balance of power between its pillars, a balance between the will of its people. Here's hoping the people of Israel are able to make their Prime Minister realize this.